Welcome to N is for Networking. On this week's show, we are completing our discussion of redundancy versus high availability. I am Ethan Banks with Holly Metlitsky, and together we talk through the jargon, protocols, design principles, companies, and other big ideas that you will run into in the wide world of networking. Now, the format of this show, if you've never listened to it before, the big idea is that I've been around networking long enough to have scars, and Holly's been around long enough to have a job in the networking industry and a ton of active certifications, but not too many scars yet. Lots of questions, though. Lots of questions. And our hope is that you'll be able to level up by listening to Holly and I go back and forth. So you can follow me again, Ethan Banks, and Holly Metlitsky on LinkedIn. And you could chat with us in the Packet Pushers community Slack, which you could join for free at packetpushers.net/community. Now, in the last episode, Holly and I ran out of time to share everything on our minds about redundancy and high availability, and we have a few more big ideas that we want to share in this episode. So if you missed that last episode, which was episode 43, you will get the most out of this episode if you listen to episode 43 as well, because basically you're coming into the middle of the conversation. Holly, you have worked through several certs. I've worked through certs, but it's been a while. It's been a minute since I've done any certifications here. You've been doing several here in the last couple of years, and I know you've told me that these certs you've been working on, they tend to focus on how to configure things. But I still have a question. Has there been coverage of high availability, redundancy, these sorts of ideas in any of these certs you've done?
I really had to think about this because I wasn't sure, and I think it's possible that within certain configuration topics, this was touched, like having like redundant links and how to configure that. But outside of that, I think everything that I've learned about high availability and redundancy has been from being in the field and getting feedback from customers and understanding what they want. I don't think it was really covered, at least not in depth in the certs.
No, and it would be, that's kind of the answer I expected you to say, because it would be a difficult thing to cover. This is a design idea. This isn't, the notion of making a highly available network is really how you think about the network from a ground up perspective, from building a foundation and then adding features and functionality to the network to make it highly available once it's built and in production. And that's not, you can teach different, like, I think it would be easier to teach about redundancy, like dealing with a redundant pair of devices than it would be to teach about high availability as a concept. But, well, that actually brings me to a point when we were talking the last time about this, which those of you listening, it's only been a couple of weeks, but for Holly and I, it's been like 6 because we've been traveling. But we were talking about the difference between high availability and redundancy. Do you remember the opinion we settled on about that?
I don't know what we settled on, but I still remember what's in my head. And that is that like redundancy was a feature of high availability. And to me, making things redundant is more about having kind of backups, where high availability is making sure that kind of no matter what happens, you always have an option in the network so that it stays up.
Yeah, and redundancy is just one way that you can help achieve that goal of high availability, of having a highly available network. Yeah, exactly. We talked about like 5 nines. A network that's got 5 nines of availability is 99.999% up, and could be down the rest of the time, but that, which would be a small number of minutes per year, that sort of thing. But that sometimes people confuse the two or conflate the two. They're high availability and redundancy. Those are the same thing. Well, not really. High availability, in my mind, is that bigger concept. Okay, so what we wanted to cover, we spent most of our time talking about redundancy specifically as a way to help us with high availability. In our last chat, I want to talk about some other ways we can help deliver high availability and make a network that is highly available, help increase those nines, those 5 nines, 6 nines, 7 nines, and so on, which gets increasingly difficult as you go forward. We're going to talk through some of that, why it gets harder before we close the show here. One way or another way that you can deliver a highly available network is with rapid failure detection. Have you heard of BFD, bidirectional forwarding detection, as a protocol?
I have. And funny enough, it was one of the first things that I learned about with regards to high availability, because it came up in the first ever customer meeting that I shadowed. This was the topic of discussion, of which at that
Was
time I had
BFD?
absolutely no clue. Yes. And I had no idea what it was. So it was just an acronym.
Okay. So do you have a better sense of what it is now?
Well, I would say it's like kind of a protocol where it help if something goes down, a link goes down, a switch goes down, whatever port, it increases the speed at which that failure is sent or messaged throughout the network. So instead of, if you just have span and tree, for example, that can take a while for it to recalculate. But if you have BFD between devices, it speeds up that whole process.
Yeah, exactly. So normally, like with OSPF, we talked in an earlier show about the timers and when the timers are sending hello messages to their opposite neighbor. And if a neighbor doesn't see a hello message for X number of seconds, I think it's on the third or fourth missed hello. Sorry, I forgot to check, but your timer's expired and that neighbor's assumed to be dead. But until that whole process has gone on, which can take as long as, I want to say by default, it would take 40 seconds for that to happen, the link is presumed to be up. And if it's actually down, OSPF's taken a long time to determine that, okay, I've tried multiple times and my neighbor is not responding to me. I guess I'm going to mark this neighbor as down, and then a routing convergence event would happen, and the network would change. Well, for that gap of time, nothing's getting sent across that link, and you've got people that are unable to reach part of the network because OSPF thinks you can reach things across that link, but in fact you can't. And so the way around it, as you were describing with BFD, bidirectional forwarding detection, it's a separate protocol that routing protocols can be aware of and can be informed by. But BFD is running very fast checks to a BFD neighbor on the other end of the link. And so more or less, as soon as a link goes down, those checks fail. The routing protocol is notified, hey, this is dead. And the routing protocol goes, poof, and a convergence event happens immediately. So we're talking about sub-second detection of a problem, and then a routing convergence happening, so that you are detecting the failure very rapidly, and you're much less likely to feel that downlink or whatever the problem is. You're not much less likely to notice it because hopefully you've got a redundant path in the network and you're going to converge on that redundant path and off you go, and not be attempting to send traffic across a link that is in fact dead. It's just that the routing protocol timers haven't expired yet. BFD does it very, very quickly. And so BFD works with a number of different routing protocols, and it's a pretty standard thing. You can dig in. There's plenty of detail about BFD. Like if you want to know what the messaging format looks like and how quickly you can send messages and devices that support BFD, there's all kinds of reading you can get into. Just wanted to make you aware that BFD is a thing. So another way to deliver high availability, Holly, I would call it, think of it as active-active. If you've got pairs of devices, sometimes they're active standby, where one is sitting there it's not processing traffic, it's just there in a standby mode. It knows what's happening with the active device. It's got a copy of all the active devices' state tables, but it is not processing traffic. So when the active device fails, and you've got a failover from active to standby, it can take a little bit of time. It's not, and there's a bunch of different ways you could deal with active-active. One way is the two devices thing that I was talking about. But another would be like active standby data centers. Have you ever been involved in building a disaster recovery data center? Something like that?
I have not been involved in it, but I know they exist. Which is crazy that you've got a whole data center that's a backup data center, but
right? A whole data center that's sitting there doing nothing, but it's up, or it could be brought up just in case you need it. When you have an active standby sort of configuration there, and you got a standby data center in this case. To me, that's always been like, I don't want that. And I don't want that, but then there's a bunch of reasons why. Part of it is, You know how you just said that's crazy, that data center would just sit there and do nothing? Well, businesses think that too. And so a lot of times what happens in that scenario is the standby data center that mostly does nothing inherits all the crappy aged out equipment from the primary data center. And so you've got a bunch of old gear in that data center. And so what do you think happens if you actually have to fail over to that standby data center?
Well, you cross your fingers and pray that it actually works. I mean,
because you didn't have if you upgraded, you probably upgraded for more RAM, more CPU, more disk, more network, bigger pipes, and everything's probably more. That's a big part of the reason you upgraded. So if you just send all your old stuff to the standby data center, exactly, you got to cross your fingers and hope it works because you upgraded out of that thing for a reason.
And it's also possible that nobody has configured it to match what the current data center is running. So it really could just be old and outdated. And now
I will almost promise you
there's redundancy, but then it's like, when is redundancy just a little bit too far?
And so I almost guarantee you that if you have a standby data center in that scenario, it's going to attract older equipment for many businesses. And then exactly what you said about, is it going to reflect the configuration of the existing primary data center? Is someone also making the changes necessary to the topology and whatever else is needed in that standby data center to reflect what's actually going on in the production environment? Probably not. So it's going to be, again, cross your fingers and hope that if you swing traffic over to the data center, that everything comes up is, good luck with that. Okay. All of that is a setup for this idea of active-active. Active-active to me, whether it's a pair of appliances or something as big as multiple data centers, is my preferred way to run redundant devices or environments or networks or data centers. When you have active-active, you are actively processing in both data centers, or through both devices, or across all the links in an ECMP link, or through both routers, or through both core switches or top of rack switches. They are live. They are production. They are processing traffic. You know that they're working because they're right there working. You're not waiting to switch over to it and then hope everything goes okay when you switch over to it. It's there for you. So you know it's working. You know it can do the thing because it is doing the thing. And it's there for you so that if one member of the active-active pair, or if it's multiple active-active because you've got 3 or 4 or 5 or more items that are processing, you know that, again, it's working. So if one member goes away, everyone else is going to carry on and do the thing that they've been doing. But there is a gotcha. And let's limit this, Holly, to just two devices or data centers or whatever. This principle is going to hold true no matter. But there is a concern here when we have 2 that are processing actively. What do you think the concern would be?
I mean, my initial thought would be more of a load balancing question of, and then fail over. Because if you working with them active, they don't necessarily mirror each other, but you've got to make sure that they have the ability to fail over from one to the other.
Yeah. They don't necessarily mirror each other depending on what you're doing. One active data center scenario I worked with, we were doing financial transaction processing in both data centers, but not both data centers were not primary for a given service. We'd have one gateway that was primary in one data center, and a different service that was similar would be primary in the other. But we could fail between the two with a simple DNS record change. It was really that straightforward. So they're not mirrors of each other. There is some potentially failover concerns, but the big thing and the key word here is capacity. So if I say capacity and you're thinking about active, where does that take you?
Well, you've got two devices doing the work, and now you're going down to one device, which likely doesn't have the capacity of both of those combined.
And so if you're processing actively, active, you need to make sure there is enough remaining capacity so that if one of the devices goes offline, you have enough capacity left over to handle whatever your peak load is going to be. Meaning, generally speaking, you don't want to be exceeding 50% capacity on either side, because you want your combined load for both devices to be able to be handled by one device or one data center, whatever the unit is that we're talking about here. So that's a different sort of design concern. But to me, that's a better trade-off than the active standby, especially active standby data center scenario, if that standby data center is treated as a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
Now, I am talking about this we want this to be an automated failover, rapid recovery sort of scenario. But I think it's fair to point out that some businesses have recovery plans or their business resilience plan. You'll hear this term, where as long as we can get processing in a couple of days or even a couple of weeks, that's acceptable. Whether it doesn't have to be this immediate failover thing. It would be inconvenient. It would suck. But as long as we're up in, some amount of time, that isn't instant, it's going to take a bit. That's all right. And so I think that is some of why some of these active standby scenarios have this second class citizen data center with older or cast off equipment, because it's okay. We just, in the unlikely event our primary data center blows up, then, we're just going to, it'll take a while, but that's acceptable. And as long as we're up in a week, we meet all our regulatory requirements, and we're not going to lose too many customers or too much business, however that goes. But that's not most environments. I mean, how many customers have you talked to, Ollie, that are like, yeah, if we were up in a week or two, it's good?
None, not one.
None.
I mean, even if it was a conversation of hours, that's too long.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think it's business dependent. So it's quite possible that I just work with specific customers that rely very heavily on their network being up 24/7. But I don't think anybody really wants days to recover anything if they have the choice.
No, and I'm with you in that. I've never worked in that scenario. I've read about those scenarios where that's a possibility. But yeah.
And also, I think sometimes I know from a corporate point of view, when, let's say, as Juniper, HPE, or Cisco, whatever, discussing with customers about their internal failover plans, there is documentation about their recovery process and all the stuff that I've had to read into for security screenings and stuff. But it's more to cover yourself than the company is actually going to take that amount of time to get it up and running.
They may have to have it documented for ISO compliance or
exactly.
sort of things. Yeah,
but they're not taking 3 days to fail over. They've just put it there.
It's
for a good buffer.
They had, right. Yeah, the intention is to be much more quick, but just in case, they've documented so that they can fall back to that if things don't go well during the recovery process. All right. Another way to deliver high availability. We talked about rapid failure detection using BFD as an example. We talked about active, and I think we beat that pretty well to death, Holly. I think we killed it. So graceful degradation is another one. And what I mean by graceful degradation is it's still working. It's just slow. So things are up, but there's some kind of a problem. And so we're up. It's just things aren't functioning as quickly as possible. We're not down or just slow due to whatever failure has happened. So for example, I'll give you a tool that would factor in here. QoS, quality of service. That's a diabolical acronym for anyone who's a network engineer and has worked with QoS. They know the evil that lurks deep in the heart of QoS. Have you has that showed up in your certs at all, QoS?
It has. I'm really avoiding the day that I have to firsthand deal with it. But I have watched other colleagues suffer at the hands of QoS.
I love QoS. It's a personal favorite topic of mine, and I'm looking forward to covering QoS in some future episodes. But so in your mind, what is QoS for? What's it do?
Well, it's about prioritizing traffic. And for example, if for us, we would want to prioritize video and audio. So you create queues and buffers so that traffic can be prioritized and queued up. And if there is kind of a bottleneck, things are going in an order that keeps your network working at what you need most out of it. And things that are less important might take a little bit more time, but it's following a organized process of queuing, which, funny enough, I did an entire course on queuing theory in my degree.
Oh, queuing theory is complicated.
So
there's a lot to it.
You wouldn't think, but that's pretty much what QoS is. It's all queuing theory. But side note.
It is. And it's funny, as I dug into QoS over the years and had to write some QoS policies for some fairly complex scenarios. The way it's one thing to write the policy that can help you with prioritizing which packets go and how much bandwidth to allocate them so that they are dequeued in a timely fashion, and figure out which packets in the buffer to drop, because inevitably you don't have enough cycles to get everything that gets buffered up during a congestion time out the door, and so someone's got to drop. You're just not going to be able to get them all sent. Mm-hmm. But then there gets to be a lot of math, and I bet if I picked your brain, you could help me understand some of the math involved to
I'd have to go and review
fine-tune those QoS policies.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, I loved it. It was very interesting because it's like you said, like when you configure it, it seems quite simple. Like, oh, this is going to be tagged with this and go into this queue, and this will go into the other queue. But there's a way in which you can't always have the priority traffic going through, because then nothing else is ever going to get sent. So it's a fine balance and magic.
Oh yeah. So we've been going down the rabbit hole of QoS a little bit because it's a topic that I love, and so on. There's a lot there. Now, QoS, if you've never heard the term before and you're out there listening, it is not a protocol. It is a whole group of different techniques that can be used to solve the problem of there's too much traffic that needs to go down the pipe. And so we have to decide who goes first, who's most important, who's going to get out the door, and who's least important. And if we have to drop that traffic because we just don't have enough pipe to carry everybody, that's going to be the most acceptable solution. Well, this is an example of graceful degradation. The degraded scenario is the link that we're trying to push traffic through no longer has enough capacity to carry all the traffic we're trying to send through it. We make that degraded scenario more graceful by applying a QoS policy that helps make sure that the most important traffic gets sent while other stuff perhaps does not. So that makes that painful situation where things are kind of slow more tolerable. So an example of traffic that might need to get sent before others would be, as you said a little earlier, Holly, voice and video traffic. If you're using an IP phone, which if you're on your mobile handset talking across the cell network, that's very probably voice over IP. Holly and I are recording with a tool called Riverside right now. That's voice over IP going across the internet. And a QoS policy on your enterprise network where you can control which traffic gets sent first allows you to say, hey, any of the voice traffic going across this network needs to get sent first. And you can put it in a priority queue or a low latency queue, all depending on the whatever the scheme is that you're using, and make sure that voice traffic gets sent and not dropped. That way, the experience of the two people talking on that voice over IP circuit, they don't know that the line's congested. They're just hearing their normal voice conversation and everything's okay. So graceful degradation, QoS being an example there, is a way that you can help deliver high availability. I suppose another way, as I'm thinking about this, would be ECMP, equal cost multipath, where we've got a bunch of parallel links, 4 of them or 8 of them going as between two devices. One of those links fails because reasons, and there's a graceful degradation there. The link is still up, because it's an ECMP bundle, you've just lost one of the members. So you've lost some of your traffic capacity. That would be a graceful degradation. There's probably more. What else? What am I forgetting? There are other ones you can think of?
I don't know. I've never really thought of graceful degradation, funnily enough. Like now that we've discussed it, it's quite interesting. But to me, that's just partially broken. Like I didn't think about the fact.
It is. That's not wrong. Yeah, no, partially broken is that's a very... Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess redundant power supplies would be another one. You got two power supplies or three power supplies in a device, and one of them fails. You're in a degraded state. It's a graceful degradation. The chassis is still up and running, but now as soon as that other one goes down, you're gone. Anyway, yeah, okay. So graceful degradation, that's another way to deliver high availability. And then the last one I'll mention here is proactive failure detection, which is I think it's a new thing. But proactive has the idea of trying to get ahead of failures instead of the normal network operations standpoint, which is we react to failures. Oh, the thing's red on the screen, or, the link is now full all of a sudden, or, the optic has failed. That something's broken, something broke, and we react to that broken state. Proactive failure detection is trying to predict when the failure is going to occur, or getting signals from the network that hint that something's about to happen, or using history from past days to understand, look, the pattern on the network is this. We're going to see this big surge in traffic come across this link from these sources, and it happens every day between 4:34 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock, and then begin to change things or adjust to things so that you are dealing with the failure before it occurs. Does that seem like madness?
I think that's the ideal world, right? That nothing ever fails after the fact. You can prevent failure by proactively understanding that something is going to fail, which would be amazing if you could do that for everything.
You can do it for a lot of things increasingly. So I almost every show it seems like I've recorded in 2025, we've involved AI, artificial intelligence at some level. I don't. You and I haven't talked about it too much, but you must be dealing with it all the time as
yes, especially in this specific case of proactive failure detection. That's really the best use case for AI, where pretty much what you said, you are assessing how the network should be, understanding its baseline state, so to speak, and then using whatever AI algorithm, you can start identifying anomalies and saying, well, hey, this is usually how it goes. The temperature of the switch is usually around this, and suddenly it's spiking. You should probably take a look at that. It probably is going to fail. A lot of this is with optics, which is pretty cool. Optic failure is quite easy to proactively understand that it's likely to die. But there's a lot of use cases for those.
And the AI piece comes in because one of the things artificial intelligence is good at is taking in massive amounts of telemetry, thousands and thousands or millions and millions of records, parsing through that amount of data, which for a human would be overwhelming. There's no way we could get through it, finding trends, and then picking out that signal from all that noise of the individual records, but going, hey, we're seeing whatever the metrics are coming off of an optic that are indicating a failure, like heat or other sorts of errors that the optic might be incurring, and going, this thing's on the way out. It's still sending stuff now, but it's on the way out and needs to be replaced, and flag it. Other things I can think of historically that would have been really interesting had they been raised would have been, I used to work with a lot of chassis switches, and the chassis switches have line cards in them. And a chassis switch is an entire entity, but then the line cards are individual entities within that line card. We manage a chassis switch as one big switch, but in fact, you've got all these individual components in the thing, right? I remember a chassis switch with a line card in it, and one of the ASICs was starting to go bad. And the only symptom was the occasional mention of a layer 3 forwarding error, kind of an obscure error. And in long story short, that there was a piece of silicon, an ASIC that was going bad on that line card that had I not been logged into a switch doing some kind of a configuration change and happened to notice that error as it went by, I wouldn't have known that was even happening. But that's something that could have been flagged in a lot of ways. It didn't have to be AI, but I mean, AI certainly would have noticed that because there were some other errors that went along with those things. Similar to that, there was not a problem with this line card, but we were overwhelming a particular line card with traffic. And the symptom was out discards. We were seeing the out discard metric. In other words, I tried to send this packet or Ethernet frame, but I was unable to. I just don't have the capacity to do it. So I dropped it. I discarded it. An out discard. That can indicate, in our case, it indicated we're trying to send more traffic through this line card than we were able to. Had to upgrade the line card to something that was more capable. It was kind of a gray failure. Everything was working. It happened to be an iSCSI storage array that, I mean, as I was looking at the errors accumulated in this line card, I'm like, well, it's working, but I mean, the storage has got to be slow, right? But no one was complaining. So I don't know. Things like that are nice to know before someone actually complains about the problem. Well, all right. So those are some other ways to deliver high ability. And I suppose there's more. If you have, more techniques or more, things you want to share with Holly and I about your high availability techniques and how you deliver them, you can send them to us. You can send us a voicemail, N4N voicemail at packetpushers.net, or go to packetpushers.net/follow-up and type out your thoughts. And we will cover those in a future episode. All right. 2 more points I wanted to make, Holly, about this whole thing. The ideas to consider when evaluating high availability. And these are more businessy things. Well, one's a businessy thing and one's kind of a design thing. And one of these is going to be right in your wheelhouse, because when you're considering high availability, you're talking about money. So how do you deal with that when you're talking to customers?
I have an account manager who talks numbers and I just give them the technical suggestion. No, but there comes a point where you need to understand what is the cost of failure? And that's really important. I've actually done this exercise with a customer, which is really, really interesting to understand, like, every minute that your network is down, what is that costing the business? And if you are able to understand the financial implication of that, you can then understand that it's actually worth allocating budget to, even if it's not an active situation, active standby, which kind of seems like you're paying money for something that you're not using. But that cost of just buying that extra switch or building that extra data center, maybe that's a bit far stretch, but is sometimes less than the cost of what that failure would cause you. And often, like, a failure is millions and millions of dollars for some companies. So you've got to try and look at it from a business understanding, not just, this is a budgetary thing, I don't want to spend this money, but like conversely on the other side, well, if you don't, how could this possibly impact you? And that's really the conversation you're going to have, because if you just say, this is really expensive to have 2 active switches, but I'm only going to doing one and they're running at 40% capacity each, you've got 60% capacity on each switch that's going to waste, so to speak. So it's a tough conversation. And it's usually the first thing that comes up when you're discussing high availability. It's always money.
But you nailed it when you said that the focus of the discussion is a business discussion. That is, if the network is down, how much money is the business losing per minute or per hour while the network is offline and unable to function? So I'm gonna back up a step. I was just at a conference, the AutoCon 4 conference. It's a conference about network automation. It runs twice a year, once in Europe and once in North America. And the keynote for AutoCon 4 was delivered by Jeff Gray. He's the CEO of Glueware. Glueware is a network automation and orchestration platform. Was he talking about nerd stuff? Not really. He was talking about money. That is, how do you get your network automation project funded? And the whole point of his keynote talk was you need to learn to speak the language of business to the people who are going to spend money. You need to be able to justify your IT, your technology purchase, so that they understand how this thing they are going to spend money on ultimately helps them make money. Which for an engineer, like we're nerds. We just want to do the cool thing because it's either we have this idea of the quote unquote right thing to do, because this would be built correctly if we did it like this with high availability. But the business doesn't look at it that way. The business says, we're going to buy the thing if you can demonstrate with numbers how the business makes money by buying this thing. And that was the thrust of Jeff's talk. It was really interesting. If you want to go hear that talk, he gets right into the guts of it with things like net present value and how to compute a ramp time. And he gets right into it. So you can speak the language of the bean counters and justify your purchase to them. And then, if you're listening to the show, maybe that's not exactly the kind of thing you're going to have to do, but you need to think in terms of ROI, return on investment. Do you have people that ask you about ROI?
Yep, all the time, every conversation.
Yep.
Yes. Everything's money. And I think everybody should butt into this. Like, even if you're just a network engineer managing your network, at some point, you're going to hit your head against the company's budget. And you got to know how to justify what you need to keep doing your job optimally. And that's
and you need
explaining. It's just you're explaining to non-engineer.
You need to expect that. You need to anticipate that money is going to be part of the conversation and not roll your eyes and go, why don't they just spend the money and do the right thing? Why are they being so cheap? They're not being cheap. They're making sure you get paid next week. They only got so much money to work with, and they are keeping the business running. They need money to do other things. Money they spend on technology is money they don't have to do something else that the business might need. And so it's a thoughtful conversation. You have to justify why the expense is there. So let's lay a couple of real basics down for you. You'll hear terms CapEx and OpEx. What do you think, Holly? You got definitions for those two?
Sure. Well, CapEx comes from the word, I guess, capital. So it's how much are you laying out upfront to, for example, purchase the hardware, purchase the subscriptions. It's that initial cost, which usually is the first thing you hit and is the scariest thing to deal with because that's what you're paying now. But then you get to OpEx, which is like the operational cost. So how much is this actually going to cost you to keep running? And I think with automation, OpEx is really part of that conversation. And both of them come hand in hand.
So a CapEx for like a redundant WAN circuit might be the CapEx, the capital expenditure might be a router and the installation charge to stand the circuit up, something like that, let's say. The OpEx would be the monthly cost to pay to the service provider to keep that circuit up and running, and alive. And maybe there's transit charges or other charges that go along with it. So you need to understand what the upfront cost is and then what the ongoing cost is. Another example of OpEx would be a maintenance contract. You have a maintenance contract that comes up probably once a year for renewal so that you can call JTAC and get support for whatever the thing is that's going on and stay current with NOS upgrades and these sorts of things. So there's CapEx and then there's OpEx, and the business looks at those in different ways. A lot of businesses, that's not an either or. There's usually a both for most of these things. Is Juniper doing any? I don't want to put renting of hardware exactly, but more or less that, where you'll put a box in someone's data center and people will pay monthly to use it and maybe pay by port count or something.
I'm not sure about that, but we do have options for some of our own products. Like I think it's one of our bigger SRXs. You can pay, it's let's say a 1.6 terabit box, but you can actually pay, you need that in the future, but now you're only using 800 gigs. So it's kind of like a bit of a subscription model, so to speak, or how much you're using.
Okay. And that I wanted to raise that to point out to people that are listening that are unfamiliar with the stuff that you can buy hardware now and not have to buy the whole box, because Juniper and various other companies have similar kind of things. You're going to pay more depending on how much of it you've lit up, whether it's throughput, like you were talking about, as SRX that's capable of 1.6 terabits per second, but you only need half of that today, even though you eventually think you're going to need the 1.6. Well, they'll only charge you for half of what you're putting through the box today, so they can get that box on site, and but you don't have to buy the whole thing up front effectively. It's a way to defer some of that cost to a later time or convert it from a CapEx to an OpEx. Some accountants prefer the OpEx model because it more evenly distributes their expenditure in a more predictable way down the line, rather than having to use some kind of amortization schedule to depreciate the capital expenditure cost over whatever the lifetime of the box is, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it might be. It's all numbers and accounting stuff.
Yeah.
But again, the business thinks about things like this.
And when you're on the sales side of it, like, yes, I do a lot of like engineering stuff, but there are a lot of conversations where to me, I'm like, you're paying the money. Like, it's the same cost, but from a sales perspective and from a company's accounting perspective, if you can take that cost and change what it looks like and distribute it over X amount of years, or there are all sorts of creative ways that you can make CapEx and OpEx and all of these numbers look a little prettier so that you can get what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes it's more of when I say optics, not literal optics, like a look thing about the numbers. Because to say, this is going to cost you $10 million up front is quite crazy. But to say, if you do this kind of agreement and we understand that you only need 5 boxes now and 5 boxes in 10 months or whatever it is, and you can schedule those payments over time, that looks better. Even if the total amount of money that you're paying at the end might be the same. It's the game of sales and corporate budgets.
But it's an important game. It's an important game.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I'm a small business owner, but I deal with cash flow challenges in the sense that I don't have the same cash flow from month to month. I don't know in January versus February how much my cash flow might be. 1 month it could be a lot more, and 1 month it could be a lot less. Some businesses are seasonal. They make most of their money in around the holidays in the November, December timeframe, and the rest of the year is quieter. And they don't. And so they might need more cloud capacity or computing capacity of some kind during those at the end of the year. But maybe they don't want to have to pay big dollars in November, December to have that computing capacity. They'd rather spread that out over the entire year. But they know what their needs are, but they want to distribute those costs more evenly to adjust for that cash flow and deal with however much money they've got at the bank. Again, you as an engineer, you don't want to have to think about this stuff. But if you are kind of savvy about these things, you can have these conversations, you're sensitive to the business needs, and you can talk to a business stakeholder that is someone in the C-suite, someone in accounting, someone in finance, and talk intelligently about these things and not roll your eyes when they're like, pushing back on you because of the bill of materials you put before them. And asking for, they're asking for you to do something. It's like, I don't care about that stuff. You guys figure out the finance. No, it might be you, as the engineer that's got to talk to someone like Holly and help figure out what those options are. And when you get into redundancy and high availability, you're talking about extra money that you got to spend for something that in theory you don't technically have to have the network function. And so you got to justify this and then know how to spread costs out, or at least know that these options are available to you. And then remember that budget's always a constraint, no matter what. You may design the ultimate, awesomest, bestest network ever. And with all the resiliency that you could possibly want, this thing is going to be 110 nines when you get this thing done. It's going to be amazing. And the business can't afford it because you expect a solution that costs $100 billion and they can't possibly do it. And so you're going to have to slow your roll and back it down. There'll be this gold-plated, amazing solution. And you can really only afford copper. You can't afford gold-plated.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing which I think about sometimes is even if you work for like a multi-million-dollar corporation, they still don't have endless money to give to you and your budget. Because in order to have a multi-million-dollar corporation, you don't really want to be spending millions and millions of dollars to get there. So no matter how large your company is, there's still going to be budget constraints. It exists pretty much everywhere. So if you can start thinking about these conversations prior, I mean, that's what I do. If I'm coming to a customer, I understand these things up front, because after the fact, all they're seeing is the high cost of it. You've got to present it in a way that it's a value add.
Although there is, depending on the business, there could be a perspective change between, do they look at the network as a cost center or do they look at the network as the thing that makes them money?
Yeah.
If you're a service provider and you make your money by selling bandwidth, then you look at expenses differently than if you're an enterprise and your network is necessary to do business, but it's not the thing you're selling. It's not the thing that makes you money. And so you look at it as an expense and feel differently about it. So that's another perspective you can have as an engineer, understanding how the business looks at the network that you're doing the engineering work on for you. But again, the big thing for me, I know when I was a young engineer, I thought all that stuff was stupid, and it frustrated me that we wouldn't do the right thing. I had no concept of money, and it was just like, they're just being cheap and they're dumb and they don't get it. Well, if it really is that critical of a design element, you got to help them get it in a way that they understand. And so you could say things like, hey, guys, if we don't buy a secondary link and the primary link fails, we are not going to be able to process online orders until that primary link is fixed. Now, the average link repair time is 36 hours because you know from some metric, some real number. We in lost sales over that 36-hour time would be estimated at about $3.9 million. But the backup link, if we have it, the thing that would allow us to keep processing if the primary link goes down, that's only $2,500 a month. That then puts numbers around that expense in a way that they can go, okay, it's a risk reward thing. Do I want to risk being completely offline and losing roughly $3.9 million, or do I want to spend an additional $2,500 a month to know that I'll be able to process no matter what? And then they'll make a judgment on it if you can come up with those sorts of numbers. But don't roll your eyes. Just say, Holly, help me figure it out. She'll help you.
It's my favorite thing to do, actually, because my full background is in optimization. So if I can figure out like playing with these numbers and understanding the cost of failure, I really enjoy it. It's fun.
Okay, so we talked about money and high availability. One other concept I want to introduce here as we close is that of fragility. And there's a weird twist of fate here in that when you add components to a system, to a network, to make it more highly available, you are adding some complexity to the network. And when you add complexity, it tends to be a bit more fragile. And the more complex you make the system, the more things there are that can go wrong, and the more likely it is that something's going to break. And that's kind of ironic. That is, to me, that is the irony of redundancy. So, for example, let's say we're using a gateway redundancy protocol like VRRP. Okay, we got two devices. They can both act as routers, and they share a floating IP address between them in the VRRP scheme. You familiar with VRRP, Holly?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we've added redundancy. Now we've got this floating IP address between these two routers. And if one fails, the other one becomes the active router that grabs that floating IP address. But what did we introduce? A new protocol called VRRP. And the need for those two routers to be able to see each other and keep up with each other using VRRP, which is now a new protocol and a new thing for routers to keep, new code that the routers have to run to do that. And the opportunity that VRRP itself is going to break and cause a split brain or some kind of a scenario like that could actually introduce a failure into the network. Have you run into a situation like that before?
Yes, that exact situation with VRRP and the complexity.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Yes. It's because I wouldn't say it's not easy to set up, but you are now exactly what you said. You are relying on a protocol to do its job, which seems like obviously it would do its job, but they don't always. And different devices act in different ways, and you're trying to just make your network more resilient, but actually you've added in all of this other stuff that now you have to learn how to manage and sometimes isn't working as expected. Or if you just had one router, the only concern is that if it fails, you're kind of screwed. But if it doesn't, you don't have to worry about any of these other things.
And there you are. There's the challenge of building redundant systems, building highly available systems. As you add all these more pieces, you have all these other things that could maybe, go wrong. And it's like you said, Holly, if it's simpler, it's less likely to break. Of course, now you've got single points of failure probably, and that's bad too. So I say that just to go, if you're a network engineer, there's always trade-offs. There's always trade-offs when you're building out these systems. It's not like, got the redundant thing. Awesome. Yeah, hopefully everything works like it's supposed to. Hopefully there's not, I don't know, bad code written by the vendor that's causing a slow memory leak that eventually the router's going to crash. And that, had you not been running that particular protocol that you needed only because of the redundancy, then you never would have crashed the router. That's just the way of it. And you end up learning kind of with your gut as to like, this is too complicated. This is over-engineered. We're trying too hard here. This thing is going to be so stinking fragile if we do it like we sketched on the whiteboard. It looks amazing and it makes me feel good, but I don't actually want to run that in production. I think it's too much.
Yeah. And I think it's in your book with Russ White where it says something about like, if you haven't found a trade-off, you probably like not doing things right, which it's everything in like building a network is a trade-off. And I feel like fragility it's a really tough one because it's where do you draw the line? And I don't know. And I think part of that comes back to actually managing the cost of it. Like, is the cost of something failing greater than, the cost of just leaving it as is, or the cost of redundancy, or, you need to figure out where is the value being added and where are you just doing it to, like you said, like over-engineer something.
Another way that I've heard, so the point you're making about trade-offs, if you haven't found the trade-offs, you haven't looked hard enough. There's always a trade-off of some kind. But then, another design principle is as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yes.
If you make it more complex than it needs to be, if you add too much stuff on, too much glitter, too much sparkle, you just, why? You're trying too hard. Keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler. It could be that a single router with a single circuit is in fact too simple. That's the wrong trade-off to make. You really do need to have a secondary link in place or a secondary router or whatever it is. Simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think that's become a principle because we engineer types love the new shiny toys. Oh, there's a new feature. Oh, there's a new protocol. Oh, there's this, there's that. Cool. I want to do that. And then your production network becomes a science experiment. And your production network should never be a lab. You do not try things in production. You try it in an actual lab environment, not in production. And I've walked into too many shops where it was pretty obvious that my predecessor thought that the production network was his or her own private lab. It's like, what are you doing? No, this is terrifying. What did you turn that on? Oh, God, I can't think of a specific example at this point. I just remember deconfiguring things that had been turned on for no obvious reason. It seemed like someone was studying for a test or something. I don't know what they were doing.
Just flipping the switches and seeing what happens,
Yay. Well, Holly, we squeezed another half-hour conversation into an hour. We did it yet again. So, okay, those of you listening, it is a running joke between Holly and I that we have a script that's only going to take us, 30 minutes, and inevitably we're killing an hour in these conversations. This was one that we both believe, like, I don't think this is that long of a talk. I'm looking at the running time of
really believed that, though. Like, I really believed it. I was like, there's no ways. Come on.
I did too. Oh, good chat, though. Good chat. Okay, everyone. We hope with redundancy and high availability that we've beat this one to death. Again, you can hit us up at packetpushers.net/follow-up with your thoughts, with your well actually comments, and we appreciate all of those. We love it when you send them in. And our next episode, Holly and I, it's going to be our last show of 2025, I think. And we've got a bunch of comments that people have sent in. Some of you have sent in book length follow-ups. They're amazing. Some great stories and things that you're sharing. And I think that's the next show, Holly. I need to go through all the comments that have come in over the last few weeks and talk through them. And you know what we should do, Holly? We should brainstorm on what we want to do for 2026. Because I know we've been kicking around. Like, we know we got to do a series on BGP. We know we have to. You're so excited. I can say
there's a long list of things. It's just the problem is that as we add these in, we teetering towards EVPN, VXLAN. I feel like that's just lingering. Everybody's waiting for that, and I just want to keep pushing it out.
The reason we have to have the BGP series before we can do the EVPN series, absolutely.
Yep.
That is part of it in my mind. We've got to talk through fundamentals of BGP so that we've got the groundwork that we can then talk about the EVPN control plane and MAC addresses and and all the things that are happening within EVPN, VTEPs and VXLAN to VPP VNI mappings, and We know the request. We know out there you've got them. You want us to talk EVPN. We're getting there, but we got to do that BGP first. Anyway, we'll do that in the next show. We'll do a bunch of your comments and follow-ups and actuallys that have come in. Talk about what we're going to do for 2026, and then in 2026 we're going to hit the ground running. And we're really looking forward to it. And again, if we want your voice memos too, we would love it if we could actually play a recording of your voice in the show. N4N voicemail at packetpushers.net. That would be awesome. N the number 4N voicemail at packetpushers.net would be super cool. But if you just don't want to, because you can make those with the voice memos app on your phone. It's really easy. And then just, send it along as an email attachment. But yeah, if you don't want to do that, packetpushers.net/follow-up. And Holly and I are both available on LinkedIn and the Packet Pushers Community Slack group, which you can join again for free, packetpushers.net/community there. And if you've been watching this on YouTube, actually wherever you are, Spotify and so on, like, share, and subscribe. All those things help the show. And if you're on any of those platforms, leave a comment. That would be good too. I have to admit, I know some of you have been leaving comments on Spotify and I haven't been following. I got to go back and collect those. There's a bunch of those in there too. We'll do that in the next show too, Holly. We'll read some of the Spotify comments and so on. Anyway, last but not least, just remember that networking isn't hard. Other people figured it out, so you can too.